webinar, Brain-Based Presenting, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Sharon Bowman. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Stay tuned at the conclusion of the broadcast for an exclusive offer. Before we begin, please note that there's a question and answer window located in the upper right corner of your screen. You may use this during the webinar to submit your questions, and we're going to answer your questions as we receive them. If we run out of time, we will answer them by email after the session. My name is Lana Dow, and I will moderate today's webinar. I'm in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Today we are delighted to welcome Sharon Bowman. Sharon is an expert in the fields of accelerated learning and brain-based instruction, helping trainers to polish their presentations and improve their training skills. Sharon has authored several HR books, including The 10-Minute Trainer and Using Brain Science to Make Training Stick. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Lana. Welcome to everyone participating in this webinar. You're going to learn more about the human brain in 1 short hour than you've probably ever learned before. And you'll be creating your own list of presenters' tools during this program. You'll be able to use these tools anytime you present information to others, whether it's in meetings, training programs, presentations, or even in webinars such as this one. We'll begin with a somewhat obvious fact. You have one of these. So this webinar is about your brain, as well as the brains of the folks you interact with and the people you share information with. This webinar is about the things that get your brain to pay attention, as well as getting the attention of your audiences. And it's also about engaging and involving your audiences so that they will remember and use the information that you present to them. Basically, you're going to do what is called recursive learning, meaning that you're going to use the thing to learn about it. You're going to use your brain to learn about how to get any human brain to pay attention. It's kind of like when you take a computer class and you use the computer while you're learning the computer program. You'll be using the very same brain-based tools that you'll be learning about during this webinar. Now, because this webinar is about the human brain and how to get it to pay attention, let's first do a quick brain exercise. You're going to do 2 things with this sequence of numbers. First, add them together to get a sum. You're going to do this in your head. Please do it now. All right. Second, if you are in a room by yourself, think about how your brain arrived at that sum. And if you're sitting in a room with others, quickly turn to the person seated near you and tell them the sum you got and how you got it. You'll have about 10 seconds to do so. Begin now. Now, I'm sure that most of you got 55 as the sum. And yes, there is another sum if you counted the number 10 as 2 individual digits, rather. And once in a while, a few people do that. So let's take a look at the variety of ways you might have arrived at 55. If you're in a room with others, raise your hand if you added the numbers from left to right, 1 to 10, and look around to see how many people that are in the room with you did this. Usually a little less than half of a group adds this way. If you added from right to left, 10 to 1, and you're in a room with others, raise your hand and look around. Usually about a quarter of a group adds this way. If you grouped numbers consecutively, like these 2 examples here, raise your hand and again look around to see how many people grouped consecutively. And usually you'll find a little less than a quarter of the people in the room who group answers consecutively like this. Okay, how about grouping by tens? Raise your hand if you did that and look around. So we're grouping, we're doing 1 plus 9, 2 plus 8, and then throwing in the 10 and the 5 at the end, or vice versa. You start with the extra 10 and 5. About half of people who group numbers in some fashion group by tens. And finally, raise your hand and look around if you grouped by 11s. And I know a few people are saying, what does she mean, group by 11s? Either beginning in the middle like this, 5 plus 6, 4 plus 7, and so forth, until you get to 1 plus 10, or perhaps you added the 1 plus 10 first and worked your way inward. Just to let you know, only about 1 or 2 people in a room full of 30 group the numbers this way. And usually those people are mathematicians or accountants or technology experts. So you're in good company if you did this. Now, this brain exercise has nothing to do with how smart you are, nor has it to do with how good you are at math, or with a right way of adding numbers. Obviously, there are lots of right ways to get the answer 55. What your brain was doing was creating patterns from the numbers that would help you arrive at the answer more quickly. Now, you may have been taught one way to do an exercise like this, and one way only, perhaps 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. And when that happens, tradition kicks in, and your brain may not notice any other patterns or any other ways of doing it. But once you're shown that there are other ways of doing it, your brain will quickly search out those patterns that make it quick and easy for you. Or perhaps your brain created a different pattern from the ones that I listed. So basically, there were many ways to arrive at the sum 55. This little exercise, folks, is a metaphor for learning and for teaching or training or presenting. I use those 3 words synonymously. There are lots of right ways to learn and to present, and no one way works all the time. So you need to have a variety of learning tools and presenting tools to choose from. And you need to vary the ways you present information to others so that they can create the learning patterns, just like you did with the number line, the learning patterns that work for them, not just for you. Okay, you are going to have 3 challenges during this webinar. Your first challenge is, of course, to collect as many presentation tools as you can and write them down. Your second challenge is to think about how you might use these tools in your own meetings or presentations or training. And your third challenge, and perhaps the most important one, is this. You need to notice how many brain-based presentation tools I use during this webinar to get your brain to pay attention. For example, you might already have noticed how the slides look, which are definitely different from most slides you have seen. I will be modeling many of the brain-based elements you will be learning about, and the slides are just one example of this. All right, to get the most from this webinar then, you will need something to write on and something to write with. If you have downloaded and printed the handout, use it as your note-taking tool. If you don't have the handout downloaded and printed, a blank piece of paper will do as well. Writing is a powerful way of reinforcing content and moving facts to long-term memory. And your brain is going to remember what you write better than what you read on the slides or what you listen to as I'm talking. And the same holds true for your audiences. Now, take a moment. Let me get the slide. Okay, Lana, could you please forward it to the next slide, the quick write? Thank you. There we go. Take a moment right now and think about how in the past you've gotten other people to pay attention to what you had to say. Maybe you told a joke or story, or maybe you moved around the room while you talked, or you called on someone to answer a question, or perhaps you showed a photo on a slide, or you asked for a show of hands, something like that. Whatever strategy you used, you'll have about 10 seconds to write it down now. And if you finish writing before the time is up, write another strategy or two that you use to get your own audiences to pay attention. Go. By doing a quick write, you have just reviewed some prior knowledge you have about our webinar topic. Research indicates that the human brain learns better when it can connect new information to previously learned data. Your audiences will learn better when you give them an opportunity to write about or talk about what they already know. Patricia Wolfe is a college professor who's written an excellent brain science book titled Brain Matters, and she says this about writing. Please take a couple of seconds to read the slides yourself. Wolfe also points out that the brain cannot multitask and write at the same time. Think about that. The only thing the brain can think about while it's writing is what is being written. So when you have your audiences do a quick write at the beginning of your presentation or training, and it only takes about 30 seconds or so to do one, they are focusing totally on the topic and not on anything else. Now, think about ways you have seen other presenters get their audiences to pay attention. Maybe they told stories or used props or requested that their audiences say or do something. If you're in a room with others, quickly tell a person near you what that presenter did. And if you're by yourself, write a quick sentence or two describing what the presenter did. You will have about 20 seconds to either talk or write. Please begin. Hopefully none of those presenters that you saw did anything like this, or this, or this. Hopefully they did something that made their audiences feel like this. With the presentation tools you're going to collect during this webinar, your audiences will feel like this as well. You'll make them feel excited about what they're learning and eager for more. By doing the fast pass, you also connected with other people in our webinar audience. If you were sitting in a room with others, of course. Brain research tells us that humans learn better when socially connected to others during the learning experience, even during a webinar. Jay Cross is another brain science author who's also a technology guru. Here's what he says about the need for social engagement while learning. Please take a few seconds to read the slide to yourself. Cross cites current brain research that shows that humans learn better when socially connected to others, especially during a face-to-face presentation, and even during a webinar if you're sitting in a room with other people. By doing the fast pass, as I said, many of you connected with other people in our webinar audience. So we used a bit of social engagement with that activity. Okay, now I just used two presentation tools that helped you make some important connections. Connections to prior knowledge, and if you're sitting in a room with others, to our webinar community. Take a few seconds now to write down the names of these first two presentation tools on your note-taking page, if you haven't already done so. And again, if you weren't able to download and print the handout, but then write these tools down on a piece of paper. The next time you're conducting a meeting or delivering a presentation, I encourage you to choose one of these tools to begin your talk with. Your audiences will be much more engaged and involved if you do. When you begin a training, a meeting, or presentation with a Quick Write or Fast Pass, you're doing a technique called priming, which is a brain scientist's way of saying that you're getting your audiences ready to learn by connecting them to what it is they already know about the topic. This is one of the little brain science pieces of this webinar, and now the brain science I'm about to share with you will forever change the ways you present information to others. And I know that because it changed the way I present information to others. And I'll let you in on a little secret. You already know this brain science coming up because you have a brain that uses it every day. You just may not know that you know it. However, once you're consciously aware of it, you can use the information to redesign your meetings and presentations so that they are always brain-based. Here we go. The human brain is genetically hardwired to notice 4 general things. Novelty. Whoops, let's go back to novelty. There we go. The human brain pays more attention to things in the environment that are new to a person's experience. You pay more attention to things in your surrounding environment that are new to you. And your audiences pay more attention to anything in a meeting or presentation that is new to them. So novelty may include anything that is new in terms of auditory, visual, or kinesthetic senses, meaning new sounds, new images, or new movement. All right, contrast. The brain pays more attention to things that are in contrast to other things in the environment, or it pays more attention to things that are in contrast to what just came before or to what is expected. So you pay more attention to the contrast or changes in your environment or the things that are different from what you expected, wherever you are or whatever you are doing. And your audiences also pay more attention to anything that changes and anything that is in contrast to what they expect. The brain also pays more attention to anything that a person determines is meaningful to him or to her. So if something has personal relevancy for you, there's a very good chance that you will direct your full attention to it. And if your content has personal meaning and relevancy for your audiences, they will also direct their full attention to what you have to say. And the last is probably the most important, and that is emotion. The brain pays more attention to anything that makes a person respond emotionally. John Medina is a molecular biologist and the author of the book Brain Rules, and he says that emotions are the brain's sticky notes, and emotions flag the important stuff inside your head, just like a sticky note will flag the important stuff on a piece of paper. Emotions tell you what to pay attention to and what to remember. In fact, it's really difficult for the human brain to remember information that doesn't have an emotional sticky note attached to it. The more emotionally impactful data is, the better the brain remembers it. The same goes, folks, for your audiences. When you can tie emotions to the learning experience or to the data you're presenting, your audiences will remember the information longer. Okay. It's time for a pop quiz. Can you mentally list the 4 general things the brain notices? You'll have a few seconds to do so, and then we'll see if you got all 4. If you remembered all 4, good for you. Add these 4 powerful brain-based elements to your presentation tools list now, if you haven't already done so. Now we'll explore a number of concrete ways you can use these tools very shortly. But first, I want to put it another way. The human brain quickly learns to ignore anything that is routine, repetitive, predictable, or just plain boring. In other words, your brain is hardwired, programmed, if you will, to ignore the routine, repetitive, predictable, or boring stuff. And that's really important. It is hardwired to ignore this. Why? Because ignoring this stuff saves your brain time and energy. And it frees up brain space to think about other more important things. And your brain does this automatically without you even having to tell it to. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. As an example, you're driving down this highway and suddenly you realize that you haven't been in your car for the last 30 minutes. Yeah, your body is there, but your mind is a million miles away, making to-do lists, thinking about your kids, an appointment after work, your crazy neighbor, a past conversation, whatever. Or perhaps you're listening to a speech like this right now, and your mind kind of floats away for a bit, and you realize that you haven't heard a single word the speaker has said. Hopefully that hasn't happened to you, at least in this webinar. You basically went on what is called autopilot, when a subconscious part of your brain says to the conscious part, take a hike. You can think about something else because I've got this covered. Of course, the challenge for you as a presenter is to stop your audiences from tuning you out and going on autopilot. So, how do you make routine, repetitive, and boring environments like these more brain-based and more brain-friendly? How do you get the people who attend your meetings and presentations to pay attention to you? And you already know the answer to these two questions. You add, of course, novelty, contrast, meaning, and emotion any time you speak. Okay, now that sounds pretty simple. But how do you really do this when you have a lot of really important information to cover in a very short amount of time? In other words, how do you take this brain science stuff and make it real in real time and with real people? Let's take novelty and contrast first. I'm going to give you 3 simple ways to use these 2 brain-based elements the next time you present. This first way really applies to meetings or to very short presentations. There are many companies in the United States and globally now that are doing what they call stand-up meetings or simply stand-ups. They keep their meetings short, usually around 15 to 20 minutes in length. Meeting participants might stand around a table or in front of a wall chart that has the agenda on that they write on, or just in small standing groups. The reason why stand-up meetings have become so popular is quite simple. Oxygen. More oxygen flows to the brain when the body is standing and moving than when it's sitting. It's kind of like a ta-da. More oxygen means that the brain can pay better attention, it can learn better, and it can remember more afterwards. And all of this from simply changing from a sitting to a standing position. Amazing, isn't it? I mentioned John Medina earlier. He's the author of the best 21st century brain science book around and one that I highly recommend. And this is what he says about movement. Please take a moment to read the slide to yourself. Now think about all the places, both at work and at home, where you sit a lot. Think about how you might insert more movement in those places in order to get more oxygen to your own brain. Let's vary the stand-up meeting and make it more useful for you in your own work environment as well as for longer presentations or trainings, such as this hour-long webinar. So we're going to do now what is called a stand, stretch, and speak. This activity adds novelty and contrast to any presentation. And here's how you do it. Please stand up now. And yes, I'm actually suggesting that every single one of us stands up right now in front of our chairs, facing the computer in whatever room we're in, and I'm doing it too. Do I know that you're standing up at this moment? Truthfully, I haven't a clue. I really hope you are, because if you are, you've just given your brain a much-needed oxygen boost. It doesn't matter if your presentation is face-to-face or virtual. You can still suggest, just like I have right now, that your audiences stand for a few moments, and you can give them the reason why so that they understand how important standing is. Now let's add the stretch and speak parts to the stand part. Please take a moment right now to stretch any way you wish, and I'm doing it with you. Maybe stretching your arms over your head or rolling your shoulders or neck or bending around at the waist. Good. Now, if you're in a room with others, please tell the person who's standing and stretching next to you one thing you know about brain-based presenting that you didn't know before this webinar began. And if you're in a room by yourself, pretend that you're talking to a friend and explain a fact or two to that invisible friend. You'll have about 15 seconds to talk to your neighbor or to talk to your invisible friend. Please begin now. In one of the previous webinars that I did on brain-based presenting, one of the gals wrote me afterwards and told me that she had talked to her plant in her office, and another gal wrote me and told me that she had talked to her dog. So there you have it, okay? I thank you so much. Please have a seat. Here's another variation on the stand, stretch, and speak, called a sit, stretch, and think. Take a few seconds to sit and stretch in place, and then think about one change you might make as a result of what you've learned so far. Now, here are a couple of things to think about with these little short 15-second to 30-second activities like the stand, stretch, and speak, or the sit, stretch, and think. If you explain to your audiences that they are getting more oxygen to their brain by stretching or standing or moving a bit, they will be more willing to participate. And if you add a bit of humor to the activity, they'll get the added boost of endorphins, which are the pleasure chemicals of the brain. So it doesn't really matter if you're presenting face-to-face in a meeting or a presentation or training or in a webinar like this one. You can insert one or more of these tools into your presentations so that your audiences get the oxygen boost that they need. And these little exercises don't take any time at all to do. And your audiences will absolutely love you for doing that because they need the stretching, the standing, the moving, the oxygen boost. Okay, let's add these 3 presentation tools to your list now, if you haven't already done so. Think about how you might use these tools in your own training programs, presentations, or meetings. Look over your presentation tool list now and choose one of the tools that you're going to make a promise to yourself that you'll try the next time you present information to others. Circle that tool. All right, let's look at meaning and emotion and how these two brain-based elements go hand in hand. I'm going to give you two simple ways to use these two elements whenever you present. The first way to create meaning and emotion is to add images to your content. Images can be slide photos, like this example, or they can be stories, metaphors, analogies, case studies, personal vignettes, etc. They don't always have to be a photo or don't always have to be on the slide. If the image is powerful enough, it will evoke emotion, which will in turn make the content more personally meaningful and relevant. When I created the slide example, I hoped it would evoke an emotion in you. At the very least, I hoped you would feel some curiosity about what was coming next. I have to tell you, this is an aside, a group of dental care professionals are now using this slide when introducing the ACA and its impact on dental insurance plans. And I can also guarantee you that the next time you go to the dentist, you're not going to be able to stop yourself from thinking about this blue alligator. In his book, Brain Rules, John Medina says that vision trumps all other senses. In other words, there's more physical space in the human brain devoted to vision than to any other of the five senses. We have evolved as a primarily visual species. We learn better and remember more when we can see an image that reinforces data, or when we can create mental images for important information that we have to remember. Okay, now a slide like this does exactly the opposite from one that evokes meaning and emotion. Take a few moments to skim it, please. This, folks, is an example of what not to do with a slide. Slides like this one are brain antagonistic, meaning that the brain quickly begins to ignore slides when they look like this. If you feel you have to cover content in this fashion, or perhaps your company tells you to, or they have a program that's already created that you have to deliver, show an image or tell a story first, and then share the details. That way, your audiences can connect the data details to the image or the story, which will then create more meaning and emotion for them. Better yet, put all that detailed content in a handout for them to read later. Or you can pass out the handout before your presentation and have participants circle or highlight the main ideas or important facts on the handout as you talk. Instead of just sitting and listening to you, your audiences then become more focused and more involved while you're talking. Now, I already mentioned a second way to create meaning and emotion, and that is tell stories. Stories are powerful ways to help others learn and remember new information. The more emotionally evocative the story is, the better the brain will remember it. So create or collect stories that are short, descriptive, topic-related, and relevant to your audiences, and use photos whenever you can. You start with a story, and you follow up with your content. As an aside, I have to also tell you that the dental care professionals I mentioned earlier, they are also using this slide when presenting dental hygiene workshops. And between the blue alligator and the skull with missing teeth, I have a feeling your dental experiences are never going to be quite the same. These tools add meaning and emotion to any presentation. Please write them on your tool list now if you haven't already done so. Think about how you might use any of these tools that we've covered so far with meaning and emotion the next time you present. Now let's pause here for a moment If you or anyone else at your site or who is sharing the room with you has a question about our topic that you want answered at the end of the webinar, please type your question in the question box now. And remember, you can also post questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll be sure to get to them before the webinar ends if we can. On the next slide is one final way to add more novelty, contrast, meaning, and emotion to a presentation. Yep, change anything. Remember, the human brain notices things that change and it ignores things that stay the same. It also ignores anything that is routine, repetitive, or boring. So now you get to choose. On the next slide is a list of things you might change to make future presentations more brain-based. So what you're going to do with the next slide is scan the list and then choose 2 of the items to add to your presentation's tool page. You'll have about 15 seconds to scan, choose, and write. Go. All right, time for another pop quiz. Which sentence is correct? Read and mentally decide on your answer. If you chose number 2, bravo. Add these tools to your tool list now. You've probably noticed by now that this presentation is very different from most webinars and that the slides are image-rich without highly repetitive logos or templates. The images are also full screen size and are photos, not clip art or cartoons. And the fonts are really big and really fat, not small and skinny. Hopefully your brain has paid more attention to these slides than if they were all consistently similar to each other. I've also used a number of pop quizzes in this webinar to engage and involve you in the learning as well. And you can do the same with your audiences. Okay, take a quick 10 seconds to read and do what the slide says without looking at your tool list. Go. Now, let's see how much you've learned about brain-based presenting so far. Thumbs up, thumbs down is a quick way to test your knowledge. Read the statement on the slide, and if you agree, give it a thumbs up. If you disagree, give it a thumbs down. And if you're in a room with others, look around and check out the thumbs up and thumbs down around you and see if they disagree or agree with you. And if you gave the statement a thumbs up, you are absolutely correct. Here's a second statement. Give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And you're correct if you gave it a thumbs down, because the human brain is hardwired to ignore anything that is routine, repetitive, or boring. Again, thumbs up or thumbs down. Yep, images can be anything, many things rather, besides photos and clip art, okay? And then the last statement, thumbs up or thumbs down. And of course you gave it a thumbs up. Just like the pop quizzes, thumbs up and thumbs down is a way to make slides more interesting and interactive, especially when reviewing content that you've already talked about. Okay, You're going to write an action plan at the bottom of your tool list now. And this is a commitment you're making to yourself to use something you learned from this webinar. So you're going to start the action plan with, I plan to, and then write a sentence or two about what changes you will make as a result of what you've learned here. And you're going to have about 15 seconds to do so. So if you finish before the time is up, write another sentence about what kind of a change you could make. Please begin. When you write an action plan, you're actually increasing the likelihood that you will follow through and do something with what you've just learned, rather than just thinking about it. And the same holds true for your audiences when you have them write action plans as well. Now, quickly compare your tool list with the one on the slide. If there's anything on the slide that is not on your list, add it to your list now. And I'm going to give you a hint. There are at least 3 more tools on this slide that many of you have not yet written down. Okay, check to see if you got all 3. You now have over a dozen quick, easy, topic-related, and brain-based presentation tools that are guaranteed to get and keep the attention of your audiences. Better yet, you have the brain-based reasons for using these tools. In effect, you now know the why as well as the how. Your audiences will leave your meetings and presentations feeling like this: excited about the learning and eager for more. Here's a secret, folks, about presenting this way. You are changing the traditional presenting paradigm in which one person talks and a whole lot of people sit and listen. Traditional presenting works well for the presenter, but not so well for the listeners, because listening is not synonymous with learning. It's even more difficult for the listeners when the content you're talking about is complex, dry, or very technical. So inviting your participants your audiences rather, to participate in short, quick activities like the ones you've written down on your tool list and the ones you've experienced in this webinar, you're helping your audiences remember and use the information you're presenting. In other words, you're making your presentations or training a more brain-based, more fun, and memorable learning experience for your audiences as well as for yourself. Now, here are a few final thoughts that I want to leave you with. First, your goal in presenting is not perfection. Your goal is honoring your audiences and helping them learn in more brain-based and brain-friendly ways. So polish your presentations in baby steps. Be gentle with yourself and your audiences, and know that every time you present information to others, you'll get better at it. Also, be patient with your colleagues who may not yet know the brain science behind effective presenting. Teach them what you now know. They'll learn from you, and you will master what you teach. Finally, I want to leave you with this thought. Take what you can use and let the rest go by. Experiment with the tools from your presentation tool list. Use the ones that work best with your audiences and let go of the rest. You'll be great, and your audiences will absolutely love you. Now, at the beginning of this webinar, I mentioned 3 challenges for you to do. The first was to create a collection of presentation tools that you can use, and you've already done this. The second was to think of ways you can use the same tools in your own presentations and training. And the third was to notice how many brain-based presentation tools I used during this webinar. So here's a pop quiz homework assignment, and it comes with a reward. Just answer the question on this slide. You may want to write it down if you want to do this homework and get the reward. Answer this question with 1 or 2 short paragraphs, and I will send you a free copy of my newest short image-rich slide presentation, Preventing Death by PowerPoint. And this one is not even on my website yet, nor is it on slideshare.net, so it's brand new. You can email your responses to the question to me. My email address is on this slide. It's also on the handout, and you can get the email from Lana as well. Email me your responses. I will then forward them to Lana, and I will make sure that you get this brand new image-rich slide presentation. Also, as a thank you gift from me and from HRDQ to you for your active participation in this webinar, you'll be receiving a free ebook via email following today's program. And Lana is going to send the link to this email to you. The book is in PDF format, but once you download this free ebook, you can use your arrow keys to change pages so you don't have to scroll. And the table of contents is actually a list of links, so you can jump from chapter to chapter if you wish by clicking on the links. Both Lana at HRDQ and I hope you enjoy this little thank you gift. And finally, there are dozens of free brain-based presenting resources on my website at www.boperson.com. And you have a number of these resources listed on the handout as well, and my website address is also there. My deepest thanks to all of you for your attendance, and to HRDQ for hosting this webinar. And Lana, thanks so much for all the wonderful work you've done to make this webinar a success.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was amazing, and the thank yous are just rolling in right now. Everyone is very grateful for the great information. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
One person says, I plan to use it all. This was fantastic. So thank you so much for your enthusiasm, everyone. We want to say that also as a thank you for attending, HRDQ is offering a very special offer to our attendees today to help you implement today's training. So your training sessions are also active and memorable and fun. Besides these great principles, HRDQ is offering 20% off our entire experiential games category on our website, which is hrdqstore.com. So this is the time to stock up on the game kits as well as the individual parts and components for all of our games. The coupon code is WebinarBrain at hrdqstore.com, and that coupon is only valid until the 22nd of May. You have 1 week to take advantage of that, 7 days away. So do this while it is fresh on your mind. We have a little time for some questions. Let's see. Yes, we do have a little time here. The first question I have here is from Anita. She said, please review the priming tool, the one that said priming.
Okay, priming are any little short, quick activities before your webinar, your presentation rather, begins, or before you begin presenting your content that get your audiences connected to prior knowledge about the content or the topic that you're talking about. So in the case of this webinar, the 2 activities, priming activities we used were the Fast Pass and the Quick Write. And they were actually looping through a loop set of slides when many of you signed on 10, 15 minutes before the webinar began, so that you had something to think about, to write, to do, to get you connected to the topic.
Okay, great. And you sure did a wonderful job of that as we went through here. We're getting a lot of questions about the homework question, and I want to go back just quickly to let people have a chance to, here it is. If you can see it, it's on the screen, and you can write that down, and then the email address is below in the blue, sboperson@gmail.com.
And let me add one thing to this, Lana. For those of you that decide that you do want Preventing Death by PowerPoint, so you're going to send in a paragraph or two in response to this question, there is a time limit to that, and that will be by the end of, I believe it's next week, and that's simply because then I hit the road again and I won't be able to respond to your homework or to send this out while I'm traveling and training. So I think by the end of Memorial Day weekend will be the time limit to it. And the responses that you send to me, I will send you a response, send you the Preventing Death by PowerPoint file, and I'll also forward your responses to Lana so that she can see your homework responses as well.
Okay, I'm going to keep on moving here. We have several questions now. Monica says, how do you get people to participate when they're reluctant to do so?
Okay, and for reluctant people, I'm going to say low risk to high risk. Most reluctant audiences or people in the audience who are reluctant are afraid that they're going to look stupid in front of their peers. So you start with low risk activities like the fast pass, the quick write, small pair share activities where they can talk to somebody next to them or to a small group around them. You don't do high risk things with reluctant learners, meaning calling on somebody to answer a question, which is hugely high risk in terms of the person called on, or asking people to stand up and make a presentation. If your training is long enough, obviously at some point you'll be moving towards more high-risk activities, but in the beginning you do the low-risk ones so that everyone feels psychologically comfortable.
Okay, so they don't feel like they're going to be embarrassed or stick out or something like that.
Exactly.
Justin says, what do you do when you have way too much content to cover in a short amount of time and you want to do activities?
I'm going to give you two really quick little short simple tips. One is break up your content delivery into small 20-minute chunks. You don't leave anything out. You're just timing it differently. And in between those chunks, you do a little 15-second to 30-second, maybe 60 seconds at the most of a pair share, a quick write, a fast pass. Any one of the things that we have done in this webinar, stand, stretch and speak, a sit, stretch, and think, those activities don't even take a minute. And you can pause to give your audiences an oxygen boost, then go right on with your content delivery. So you're only taking a few seconds away from that delivery of content.
Great, great.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tell everyone looking for the handout that is going to be in the email we send out after the broadcast today. So the handout will be in there. And also a lot of questions about where to get images. And so in the resources that we send out, we'll send that out in the Q&A document. There's going to be a document sent out within the next week, and we'll put some of those links in there as well.
That sounds fabulous, Lana. And there are also a number of resources for images as well as for fonts in the Preventing Death by PowerPoint slide set that I'll be sending out to the folks who decide to do their homework.
Awesome. Great. Okay, we have time for one more quick one here. How do you get the buy-in from attendees who think the activities are just a waste of time?
I'm going to say two things to that. As long as they are not interfering with the learning, the people who sit back and kind of look skeptical at this, leave them alone. Because once they see how much fun everybody else is having, they will join in. And also, when they get a chance to speak to folks around them and tell them their opinion or the things that they've learned or a quick question about something, they'll be more than happy to join in. And that is, a lot of people wait until they see that it's okay, that everybody else, it's not just frou-frou stuff. And also, if you give the explanation for oxygen and how the brain works better when there are some little short, quick activities, they will be more inclined to join in than if they think it's just, a kindergarten game that you're playing. Okay?
Great. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, Sharon, thank you so much for all that you've delivered today. This has been a fantastic webinar. Really appreciate your time and effort to help us today.
Thanks so much, Lana, to you, to HRDQ, and to everyone who's participated.
Sure thing. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. If we did not get your question answered, you're going to receive an email response early next week. And we do appreciate your time. We hope you found today's webinar informative. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye now.